So this presentation right now is entitled Coping with Grief and Loss. And we all are going to experience grief and loss at some point in our lives, right? To live is to deal with death. So this presentation is just to share some techniques that can help to better equip you with dealing with grief as well as loss. The summary is of this training is grief is something that everybody will experience in their lifetime for sure. And emotions related to grieving did not only come from the loss of someone that we love, but from losing someone or something that we hold very dear. So at times grief can be complicated by the factors such as trauma, suicide, or being a caregiver, causing us to get stuck in the grief process or one of the stages within the grief process. But it is important to understand the normal phases of grief and how to cope with loss so that we can that we're all able to manage our grief ourselves and support others who may be coping with loss. Because I'm going to go through some of the phases, the regular phases that we all have heard about associated with grief and loss, but also just wanting to let everyone know that a lot of folks sometimes get stuck within those phases, and it can be very difficult for them to come out of those phases. And that's when you would integrate therapy treatment in there to help the individuals. But grief is something that we all experience, and regardless of our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our job titles, education. But just one of the things I wanted you all to know is just that it's normal, right? It's normal. Some of the objectives of this presentation is that we're going to define what is grief and loss. And again, we're going to learn what types of grief that are out there that folks experience. Understand the different stages of grief that I just mentioned, that some of us may get stuck in those phases that may require a little bit more support. We're going to learn the symptoms of grief. We're going to understand the different types of complicated grief, learn techniques for coping with grief, and understand how to support someone who is grieving. And just let's be clear, grief is very intense and painful emotions, which that we feel when someone that we love ultimately dies. So what is grief and loss? Grief is known as bereavement, a term to describe the intense and painful emotions experienced when someone or something a person cares about dies or is lost. So it could be a pet, it could be a friend, a family member. Definitely has an impact. The loss is the disappearance of something cherished, such as a person, a possession, or a property. There are two types of grief. So anticipatory grief, so that impending death. So when we begin grieving sooner than sudden loss, it's for an example is like a long-term illness. Is when an anticipatory grief may present itself. So that impending death, and it begins that grieving process sooner than a sudden loss. All right, so sudden loss is a death that is unexpected. It's an unexpected death and can be left with unresolved issues that exacerbates the overall grieving process. These are the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I do want to go through them briefly as we go through the presentation and break them down in more detail. But the denial is, this feeling like this can't be real. This can't be happening to me. So we deny the loss has even occurred. We ignore the signs of the loss. We can't believe it. It's like a bad dream. Then we get angry. It's like, why is this happening? Who can you blame, right? Who is to blame for this death? um, why we may become angry with ourselves or with others or with faith. Like, why would God do this to me, right? Over the loss of our loved one. We pick out scapegoats on which to vent our anger, such as like doctors or the hospital didn't do enough, clerks, helping agencies. The list goes on. Bargaining is when we really try to weigh the scales out, right? Make this not happen, and in return, I will do blank. We promise to do something or do anything to make this loss go away. We lack confidence in our attempts to deal with the loss, and then we look elsewhere for answers. And then depression. I'm too sad to do anything. You just kind of want to roll up and stay in the bed. You don't want to do anything at all. We become overwhelmed by the anguish, pain, and hurt of our loss. And we can begin to have uncontrollable spells of crying or deep melancholy. So some individuals, they can't bathe. They can't get out the bed. They don't want to talk to friends. They want to stay in the dark. They don't want to move forward. And the last phase is the acceptance. So getting to that point where you say, I'm at peace with what is going to happen and what has happened. And acceptance is normally the final stages. So although I just went through the 5 stages, they normally don't happen in this particular order. And like I said previously, a lot of times we can get stuck in those phases and longer than others, or just get stuck there, not even experience some of those other phases. We begin at this acceptance phase to reach a level of awareness and understanding of the nature of our loss. And this is just an illustration about grief and loss right here. And it says, grief takes many forms, but don't worry, we're here to help you fill them out. Right? So it's many forms. So it's trying to make light of something that we all will experience at some point in our lives. But these are just some of the symptoms of grief. We have the physical symptoms, which is that low energy, really difficult to get up and motivate and move from one task to another. Sometimes it could be physiological. We could have headaches. We can have upset stomachs, and emotional symptoms, memory gaps, forgetting what we need to do or forgetting where we put things, difficulty concentrating, intense emotions that may change quickly, spirituality, so really getting stronger, belief in faith, and anger, again, at faith, like, why would God do this to me? And not believing in God anymore. Complicated grief reactions, suicide, even sometimes people say, if this individual's gone, why should I be here? Grief versus trauma, and having that caregiver's grief as well. And the complicated grief occurs when someone begins the normal grieving process, but gets stuck and symptoms worsen and linger for long periods of times. And signs and symptoms of complicated grief can include all of these different areas right here, but I'll just skirt through a couple of them. But absence of the grief reactions, and not even showing emotions, or problems with accepting the death, having that inability to even enjoy life at all, having depression or that deep sadness, and feeling that their own life doesn't hold any meaning, or lack of trust in others, grieving a suicide. So adding emotional burden of self-blame and shame and incomprehension. It's like, why you're blaming yourself because you kind of feel that you're the cause, because you didn't know, like you feel like you should have known that they were going to have suicidal thoughts and then commit suicide. So addressing religious concerns, if any. And this is just a table that's really good. It talks about the many differences between grief versus trauma. So I want to just pause for a second and let you all look at this right here, the effects of grief and then the effects of trauma. So we look at the very top, you see sadness is the very dominant emotion on the effects of trauma, terror is the dominant emotion as well. Anger is nonviolent, if we go right to the middle, but anger often involves violence towards others or yourself. Last bottom part is symptoms may lessen naturally over time, but untreated symptoms may get worse over time as well. So this table, I'm going to move myself to the top so everyone can really have a good gaze at this grief versus trauma. And I want to encourage folks to really review this and unpack this as a group to really have a good, hearty discussion about those different phases and about the two of them and how much they differ from one another. And caregivers grief. As caregivers, it's natural to become attached to someone, to some people. A lot of times within families, the most successful people within that family are the ones that have to take care of the loved one, the elderly loved one. But it's also natural to grieve for people when they die or otherwise leave. If you work in a caregiver's role, it's important to ensure that you're taking care of your needs, right? Because there's a vicarious trauma that you can experience as well. So regular practice of like kind of debriefing, like sharing what you're experiencing, what it's been like for you is really healthy. Writing a journal, writing your thoughts down, laughter, playing with others and music, regular ongoing appreciation, exercising, and eating the right foods and making time for relaxation is really important, and getting that professional experience as well. So maybe also seeking to get therapy from a clinician to help you to process your feelings and your relationship with the individual that has passed away. And compassion fatigue, and I touched on this a little bit, and that's that vicarious trauma right here. But that's like the low point of that secondary traumatic stress disorder. And it's just the lessening of compassioning over time. And you're just kind of walking around like really numb. But common in the helping professions, including healthcare professionals and law enforcement and emergency clergy, mental health professionals and teachers. It's like you see this trauma day in, day out. And initially it would have had an effect on you, but you've seen so much of it and so often that it no longer even has an impact on how you respond. These are some symptoms of compassion fatigue. So excessive blaming, voices excessive complaints about job duties, substance abuse, right? To mask feelings of smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, sometimes using harder substances, poor self-care, like hygiene, not bathing regularly, feeling sad, difficulty concentrating, mentally and physically tired, being preoccupied. All of these are all symptoms of compassion fatigue that, as if you're in one of those industries that I discussed, you really want to pay attention to how your body's responding. Here is a quote from a unknown author, but there are things that we don't want to happen, but have to accept. Things we don't want to know, but have to learn. And people we can't live without, but have to let go. Coping with loss. So find support. So find friends, family, faith community, support groups. Again, a therapist. Express your feelings in a tangible or creative way. Take care of yourself physically. Don't let other people tell you how to feel. And don't tell people yourself how to feel either. Like plan ahead. And sometimes it's good to say nothing. Like if you're with somebody who is grieving, you don't always have to say the right words. Just say nothing. And that's sometimes saying nothing is just enough. What can I do if I'm grieving? Be gentle, patient with yourself, designate a time, and take the phone off the hook. You don't always have to answer every phone call. Continue to socialize, but don't force yourself to. Take a warm bath to relax. Listen to music that matches your mood. Find a person, cause, or interest that is meaningful to you to place your energy and ensure you eat and attend to your hygiene and create a memorial, right? So a memorial box or a collage and participate in a goodbye ritual. I know folks who lost a loved one, and every year on the anniversary of their death, the family and friends get together and they let balloons, go away up in the sky, and they write little messages on the balloon. So however you want to express your emotions, or for those individuals that have transitioned on, is the most healthiest. And again, right here, I'm still in my own thunder, but releasing balloons, lighting candles, playing a favorite song, sharing written memories with the survivors of the deceased, creating memories, a book, a box, planting a special flower or a tree, and writing a letter to the deceased. And managing holidays and anniversaries. Like, look, that could be very difficult, experiencing holidays and anniversaries without your loved one, but you have to realize that you are not helpless. Express feelings as they arise. Do not engage in activities that will result in harm to you or anyone. Acknowledge the memory of loved ones. Try to keep busy, and indulge a little, right? Make yourself have fun, like you're still alive. So really enjoy this life and this opportunity to live that you have. Supporting someone who is grieving, again, listen. You don't always have to give them an antidote. You don't always have to fill in the blanks or fill in that uncomfortable quietness. Keep them in your thoughts and let them know, I'm thinking about you. Offer a gentle touch, offer to help with any errands that they have to do, helping them walk their dog, taking their kids to school, um, watch their children to provide them with some downtime. Tag along at a bereavement support group meeting if they're interested in participating in that, and invite them out to socialize, and be consistent if you can. What should I avoid? Don't try to avoid the bereaved person. Don't pry into their personal matters. Don't find a lesson in the event. Don't offer advice or quick solutions. Don't try to cheer up the person or distract them from the emotional intensity. Don't minimize the loss. Don't lead the bereaved to the false assumption that self-medicating with alcohol or drugs will provide a solution. And this is the conclusion. I would encourage you, if you're looking at this with the group, to have conversations in terms of what have you done, how have you navigated and dealt with grief in your personal life, what helped, what didn't help, um, what was the most challenging, really kind of unpack those feelings. But again, I hope that this presentation on coping with grief and loss allowed you with the appropriate techniques to help you to cope with it as well. Thank you.